we're here with our guest, Saadya Nick Chevan. He is a part of our newly introduced, what would we say, department, team, service? I'd say service clears it up best, which is called Trezor Expert. And Saadya, if you want to explain that real quick, exactly what a Trezor Expert is.
Yeah, so I've been in Bitcoin also for 6 years, not exclusively a Trezor user that whole time, but basically for me, Trezor Expert is just coming into Trezor, being a part of Trezor, and then being able to teach people why Trezor matters.
Uh-huh. And just so I guess everyone else understands, who would be like the best demographic, or who's Trezor Expert for? Exactly.
Trezor Expert is for people who need that guiding push, that sort of extra helping hand
Mhm.
towards starting out with Trezor. So it's really for all ages, everyone, basically.
Yeah, I'd definitely say that I could have used that at some point when I was in the beginning. I feel like I had to learn everything like on my own, which is what pretty much everyone has had to do up until this point. But like, I think the fact that we have this now is cool.
Yeah, same.
So,
I mean, for me, navigating Bitcoin, figuring out what the right wallet to use, that was a challenge, and I wish that I could have had a service like this.
uh-huh. Well, our topic today is, what is self custody and why does it matter? I feel like this, straight off the bat, we use the term self custody all the time. So one question is like, what exactly does that mean? Because for me, for a long time, I was like, I don't have like a clear definition of what this means. If you were to describe or say what self custody is in maybe layman's terms or simpler terms, like how's another way you would describe that?
Yeah, so it's kind of like holding your own cash.
Mhm.
So you're holding your own crypto, and you need ways to do that. That the way that we both work towards people adapting is Trezor, Trezor hardware wallets. Um, the other thing that I would say about self custody is that it gives you really the freedom to hold your own coins.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's pretty much the way that I thought of it as well. Like the majority of people, if anyone doesn't know, like most people are holding their coins on an exchange somewhere. So the way I think of it is like custody is just being held in the exchange's hands. It's like their custody, it's not yours.
Yeah,
So whenever you say self custody, it's like, yeah, that's my own or yours in your own hands rather than a third party.
Yeah, and I think like we talk about not just self custody, but sometimes we talk about things like exchange custody, so having your coins on the exchange. And the thing about all of this is that it is evolving. We are finding new ways of doing self custody. We are constantly trying to improve, and that's what I really enjoy about being a part of Trezor through the Trezor Expert service.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And what exactly makes self custody like a big deal? Why does that matter? Versus, I mean, who cares? Most of the world we live in, like we have banks, we have accounts online. Those are being held by other third parties that we trust. Why does it matter? Why should anyone care for Bitcoin? Why is it any different?
Historically, with Bitcoin, we've seen that having your keys with someone else, even one of our co-founders, Slush, he had this experience where keys can get stolen, exchanges can get hacked, exchanges can be mismanaged. So having your keys with someone else, unfortunately, that's not a reliable way of holding your money. And that's why we believe that self
Mhm.
custody is the best answer. It's even in the Bitcoin white paper. Satoshi Nakamoto writes in the very first sentence this whole idea of having Bitcoin be peer to peer, not needing institutions to um, take care of the legwork for you. And that's the power of self custody, is that you gain this sort of independence.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. And I know like one of the realization moments for me was like seeing how like Bitcoin has been an answer for a lot of the problems that we've seen with both governments and with money in the past. The specific example that I always think of is whenever they took away the ability to hold gold for yourself in the 1930s. There was like an executive order. If you don't know, if anyone in the audience isn't aware of this, there was a point in the 30s where they said, hey, everyone has to turn in their gold and you just can't. The government was like, screw you, like it's ours now. Like give us all your gold, and then you just
And
couldn't
they
hold
and
it.
they were
Mhm.
even buying it for a much lower price than they then pegged the dollar towards. It
Yeah.
was really ridiculous.
And especially like most people our age and our generation, like we weren't even around for things like that. When you start looking at history, you see places where people have been taken advantage of in terms of money, or just inflation is another one you can kind of point at. maybe you don't entirely blame the government for that one, but at the very least, you say that's something that's out of your control. And you
Yeah.
hear these arguments like, "Oh, a little bit of inflation is a good thing." That's the thing I always heard growing up, and it's like, well, okay, sure, like we can talk about those arguments on like a larger scale, but like how much does that help you as an individual? Like it's I'm not such a big fan of inflation when like bananas cost more at the grocery store or like milk or basic things. And so to me, self custody with Bitcoin, something that's compared to like a digital gold, kind of helps rectify some of those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is again part of why we need Trezor Expert is that we need people to start to learn how to best self custody their Bitcoin, start to really take their first steps into the privacy elements, the power of gaining privacy through Bitcoin. Like going back to the executive order from 1933, where the United States confiscated all of its citizens' residence gold. I was reading through it, the history, like a month or two ago,
Hmm.
and it was just astounding to me. I tried to imagine myself living through this time, like, what if I held gold? And they really cracked down hard. So this is why we need more people to get into self-custody. We need more people. This is why we want to educate people more on how to best use their self-custody uh, with the Trezor. Because by gaining that sort of privacy, if heaven forbid this sort of thing should happen again, we'll know how to fight back this time,
Hmm.
and we'll all be
Yeah.
ready for that.
Yeah, yeah, and I was gonna ask you, I mean, I think you mentioned, like, you even had a story of your own where this was relevant in the past, like someone having self-custody where that, like, helped them out in a situation?
Yeah, well, it was more, it's actually a bit sadder than that, unfortunately. So,
Mhm,
like, I had a dear professor when I was in college. I minored in music, I minored in performance, but I also took, private music composition classes with a man named Art Krieger.
uh-huh,
And, there was just yeah, I was doing that with 2 other guys, fun time, but
mhm,
there was this one day where we were just kind of if you know how music works, you go on a lot of tangents. You do the job, but you also, it's about the journey too, it's about the creative process, and there was this one day where we were just talking about, kind of I mean, times are always feeling like they're a little chaotic, and we were talking about kind of world events, chaos, what have you,
mhm,
and, he was telling us about, I think, a relative of his who, distant relative who had, I think, lived in Germany during the 30s and was a target of the Nazis. He was a Holocaust survivor.
mhm,
And so this Holocaust survivor came to the United States, land of freedom, land of opportunity at the time, and he was saving money. But he was saving money not in a bank, but under his bed. After he died, they discovered his heirs discovered $30,000 was hidden under his mattress.
uh,
That's just how much fear he had of having experienced this moment where the government took away all of his rights, all of his freedoms, all of his wealth, all of his possessions. He was
mhm,
just so afraid that he he came to America. He loved America, and he wanted to use the U.S. dollar to back himself. Now, this was, I think, in the 80s that he passed away. Flash forward to now, and now we have Bitcoin. We have this whole new asset that allows us to do a similar thing, but in a much simpler way, in a much more discreet way, in a much more private way.
yeah, $30,000 in the '80s, that's a lot more than it is today. It's like, in the right part of the country, that's like a house, like,
Yeah.
under your bed, pretty much.
Yeah. It's like 3, 4 Bitcoin now.
Yeah. And what's funny is like that's yeah, that is the exact same premise. When we talk about control, who is holding control of the wealth or the store of value, whatever it is, Bitcoin conceptually is the exact same thing. $30,000 under your bed versus having X amount on a hardware wallet in self custody wherever. That's precisely the same thing, just in a digital format.
Yeah. You're participating in a very small part in the Bitcoin ecosystem. You are participating as a user. You are basically consenting to this sort of way of managing your money. And then another benefit is, of course, with Trezor and with gaining education, you can learn more about Bitcoin, about its decentralization. As I see this more as a broader journey. We're just kind of the starting point at Trezor Expert. Um, but you can really gain more education as you go on, as you get past this jumping off point into self custody. And then you yourself can potentially become a future leader in the Bitcoin space.
Uh-huh. And that kind of leads to like the next question, which is like, what are the biggest perks of self custody? A lot of people will say, it's just easier, it's more convenient to leave my holdings on an exchange. Why not just do that? I can go grab it anytime. I mean, the analogy with 30 grand under the bed works. That's one aspect is like access to control. But what other advantages are there to self custody?
Yeah. So the problem is, the advantage to self custody is you know how it works. You know that you hold your Bitcoin in your Trezor. Your Trezor is not controlled by anyone else. You control your Trezor because you know how your Bitcoin can disappear. You know that it's not going to disappear overnight in some bank or some exchange. There's
Mhm.
this analogy called the turkey analogy. So this is again a very American example. I grew up in the States, so
Uh,
I still think very much in terms of American terms. So on there's a holiday in mid-November in the States called Thanksgiving, and a lot of people eat turkeys on Thanksgiving. So the turkey analogy is basically imagine you are a turkey on a farm. Life is great. You get to roam around, you have grass, all sort food, and you're just getting fatter and fatter, and you love life. And then you're 1,000 days old. It's fall. The leaves have changed. It's starting to get cold. Lovely weather, and someone all of a sudden grabs you and cuts off your neck, and you're dead.
mhm.
And well, the next thing is you're a turkey on someone's Thanksgiving dinner table. And that's the thing about exchanges is they will give you a great sense of security until something happens with them. Look at FTX. Like
Mhm.
I was with a lot of crypto friends the night FTX collapsed, and everyone was rushing to the FTX website trying to get their money out. It's
Yeah.
just like a turkey.
Yeah, which is also funny because that sounds like past events where like when a bank collapses and everyone like rushes on it because something went wrong with the thing holding their money.
Yeah.
It's like literally the same thing. I mean, yeah, and FTX was not like the first time this happened. Like most people, at least if you're in the crypto space, you're familiar with like Mount Gox, which until literally yesterday I thought was pronounced Mount Go because I'd only read it on the internet and I didn't realize that's not how it was pronounced. But everyone else says Mount Gox. That was in 2014. These things have happened time and time again. And it's like it's easy to, I don't know, start feeling confident in some of the bigger names. You have Coinbase, you have Binance, you have Kraken, all these different bigger exchanges, but they're not necessarily free from fault. Like they have lasted a certain degree of time, but that doesn't mean it can't happen to them.
Yeah.
And that's really, if you're not familiar with the Trezor hardware wallet yet, we'll come around to that. But that's really what got me convinced of everything after I saw time and time again these things collapsing and people getting screwed pretty much.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, what would be some good tips if someone doesn't know anything about self custody or what to do if they're doing it for the first time? What are some good tips for beginners or someone who's never really touched the subject before?
Okay, yeah. So I know we've just talked a lot about how exchanges go under. You can never predict when that is.
Hmm.
So I'm going to give a tip that's a little bit contradictory, which is start slow. And the
Hmm.
reason I say that is that when you are using Trezor, your number one goal needs to be to keep access to your crypto, your Bitcoin on your Trezor. That should be your
Hmm.
number one goal. Your number one goal is not get my coins from the exchange to the Trezor as soon as possible because
Hmm.
it's a it is, I will admit, um, it is a new device. Self custody, as I said before, is an evolving space. So you need to give yourself time to adjust to the idea of holding your own money. So I do not recommend immediately sending all of your coins to the Trezor. I recommend first learn how the Trezor works. Learn what a recovery seat is, what it means to have 20 words
Hmm.
on the Trezor. Yeah, I recommend learning what a recovery seat is, and then I recommend learning just how does the Trezor really protect your wealth? What do I need to be aware of? let me understand that, for example, you should never give away your recovery seed, your 12, 20, or 24 words to anyone because that gives them access to your crypto. You should not give it to me. You should not give it to you, Sean,
Mhm.
or anyone at Trezor. And understand these sorts of risks that you are taking on with holding your own money, which is very rewarding. Being your own bank is very rewarding, but you also need to be like a bank. You need to refuse things sometimes
Mhm.
for your own personal safety so that you can continue to enjoy the wealth, the benefits that Trezor brings. So that's why I say start slow because your goal is not to get your money off the exchange. Your goal is to have your money, have access to your money through Trezor.
Mhm. Yeah, I know the first time I ever used one, I was sending like tiny little amounts because I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing. So that's one thing you can do if you haven't used a Trezor before. Just do small amounts in the beginning and make sure you understand the whole process.
Yeah.
Because that kind of leads to the next question, which is like, how does using a hardware wallet, kind of like Trezor, help with self custody? Which you touched on a little bit already, but like, what does a hardware wallet even do? How does it even relate to self custody in the first place?
Right, right. So hardware wallet, I mean, the main thing that it does over just other self custody methods is it's protecting you from viruses. So, like when you're keeping your key, because the alternatives, for anyone who doesn't know, the alternatives are things that are called generally software wallets, which is this very broad class of computer programs. So it can be things like phone apps. There's also older stuff that I used to use, like Electrum personally. That's a very popular Bitcoin software wallet that's been around since I think 2011. So even before Trezor. And these things allow you to keep Bitcoin on, say, your computer um, or your phone, which is very convenient, but it has this problem that computers get hacked, phones get hacked. There is malware out there specifically trying to hack into these programs.
Hmm.
And with the Trezor has been designed for one thing and one thing only: crypto storage, Bitcoin storage, and well, storing private keys. So with the
Hmm.
Trezor, it has been designed for one thing and one thing only, which is storing Bitcoin private keys, securing them from any sort of person online who wants to steal them because the Trezor is offline. It doesn't communicate with the internet. It doesn't know how to communicate with the internet.
Hmm.
And therefore, when someone sends it a message saying, "Hey, here's the little secret key that unlocks you," right? Well, the Trezor doesn't know what that means and it doesn't do anything. It's that simple. It's like error. I don't care. This is
Yeah.
personifying it, but this is kind of actually what happens is it just if we didn't write the code for it, it's not able to do it.
Hmm.
And that gets me into another thing that I absolutely admire about Trezor that I love about working at this company, which is that it's open source. And that's very powerful. I mean, do you have thoughts about the open source nature of Trezor?
Yeah. And I was going to say, we finally made it. We finally connected our product to the topic we're talking about today. You can see I've got Trezor. I don't know if the camera can see this. Trezor Academy right here. This is not the thing we're focusing on today, but maybe people can zoom in. You've got the real shirt with Trezor Expert. We've obviously able to make our plug here. This is what we do. This is what our hardware wallet is for. It's for this exact thing. In open source, just to touch on that for just a minute, I feel like we say that phrase all the time, open source. And again, that's something that kind of like self custody. It gets used all the time, and it's kind of like, what does that mean? But what it literally means for anyone, a lot of our viewers they're going to be familiar with this term. But if you're someone who's not, you can actually go in and look at the code that we use to write for our software and for the wallet and see everything that is being done. Most companies don't show you the code that they write, so no one can verify what's going on behind the scenes. But with Trezor, that's not the case. Any developer, anyone who knows the code can go in and look at it because it is public and we do not hide it from anyone. So you know that what we're claiming about our product is the truth because you can go look at it yourself or have your developer or tech savvy friend do it for you. Either one of those works. But yeah, generally speaking, I think that's what sets us apart. There's so many companies who don't do that. So my feelings on it are like, hey, again, don't trust, verify. If you haven't heard that term in the cryptocurrency space, we say it all the time because you don't have to trust us. You don't have to take our word for anything. You can verify it. You can go look and figure it out on your own. So that's how I feel about it, and that's one of the things that makes me like Trezor so much.
Yeah. Another thing is because it's open source, and this is similar principles to how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin is open source. It anyone can contribute to the future of Bitcoin
Hmm.
through coding new features, coding, doing the maintenance of the code, whatever they want. Basically, they can make suggestions to how they think the community should do things, and then those can propagate through the power of its decentralization. Those can propagate throughout the network, and once enough people accept them, they happen. It's that simple. You can go
Hmm.
do that yourself. Trezor, it's a little, I mean, it's kind of similar. Basically, we have a GitHub. So GitHub is a website where people publish code, and it's, I guess, kind of like a Google Docs for code in that
Hmm.
it's got features that are specific to conducive to editing code, conducive to tracking version changes in an open manner. Actually, that's part of the power of it.
Yeah.
So there is something on GitHub called a pull request, which is how individuals working on projects that are worked on with multiple people basically show that they want particular changes to code to happen. Earlier this summer, 2024, I was at BTC Prague with Trezor, and I met this guy who told me that he had written a pull request many, many years ago now for a feature called Check Backup, which is available on all Trezors.
Hmm.
So check backup is a feature where you take your wallet backup, your recovery seed, your 12, 20, or 24 words, and you put it directly into the Trezor wallet. You put each word directly into the Trezor wallet. And then the Trezor wallet will tell you it's the correct recovery seed or it's not the correct recovery seed. Because you're putting all the words into the Trezor wallet in order for it to tell you this information, this isn't disclosing in any way the recovery seed because you'd need the
Hmm.
correct recovery seed to know if it's the correct recovery seed. But this also has the benefit that once you've set up your Trezor, um, you can make sure that your backup, that what you've written down is correct. And that way you don't find out 1 year later when you try to use the backup that actually there's a misspelling and you've now lost access to your coins. This gets back to what I'm saying is that your goal as a Trezor user is not to get your coins onto the Trezor, it's to have access to your coins through the
Hmm.
Trezor. You want to think about the future. You want to think about all of these possibilities because that's the real goal ultimately is
Yeah.
to be building this wealth and to have access to it. That's also what people historically wanted from a bank was access to their wealth through that bank.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, this guy who I was meeting at BTC Prague, he was telling me, yeah, I contributed the pull request for the original check backup feature because I wanted to check my backup on my Trezor
Hmm.
and I didn't want to go buy another Trezor in order to do that.
Yeah.
We at Trezor Expert, when we are showing people how to create a Trezor wallet, the first thing we do after they have created that Trezor wallet is we send them to settings and we make them do a check backup.
Hmm.
And we do that so that they are assured that they can access their crypto.
Hmm.
And that's very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've done that many times. Everyone who owns a Trezor has done that as well and is familiar with that process.
Of
You
course.
can too if you haven't bought one yet. Buy a Trezor. But one other question I had for you is like, what are some of the mistakes that beginners make whenever they're just starting out? And maybe because we're leaving out certain gaps, like we can't take forever on our first episode of the podcast. We kind of have to make some assumptions about people's knowledge and have them fill in the gaps for themselves. But what are some of the problems that people have, like in terms of a backup or setting things up for the first time or making certain moves when they're getting familiar with cryptocurrency?
So continuing off my point about continuing off my point about rushing into crypto, I think that one of the big risks is understanding that any sort of backup information, your recovery seed, your passphrase, if you use one, that is what you need to access your crypto. So understand that we are promoting self custody here. We are not an exchange. We are not a bank. We are a hardware company. Because we are a hardware company, we can certainly help you with using your hardware. But if you use it in a way where you lose the information needed to recover your wallet, you lose, say, your recovery seed or the pin to the Trezor, um, passphrase if you use one, well, we can't help you recover that information. We make the hardware, but we give you the independence to use it how you choose to use it. It's very important to understand that you want to keep control of your recovery seed. You want to have it in a safe place, separate from your Trezor hardware wallet. Make multiple copies of the recovery seed. We ship 2 recovery seed cards on pretty nice, in my opinion, card stock, basically. So very solid cards that are meant for kind of long-term preservation and storage. So we ship 2 with every new Trezor. The point of having those 2 cards is not to write multiple recovery seeds or in case you make a mistake. The point is that you should write your complete recovery seed on both cards so that you have multiple backups. You have the Trezor and 2 cards. So you have your recovery seed in 3 different places at the start. You yourself need to be making decisions about what the best way to protect your seed from that point on is going to be. Are you going to use maybe the new multi-share backup and keep it with multiple people in multiple places that you can trust? Maybe you're going to get a Trezor Keep Metal, which provides very solid, weatherproof, elements-proof storage of the recovery seed. This is all up to you. These are all decisions that you can make, and thankfully, they do not need to be made immediately. But the most important thing is get your recovery seed down on those 2 cards and store them, your Trezor, all in different safe places. We know that catastrophes can happen, so yeah, that's why you want to be careful. That's why you want to have a plan.
And yeah, I was actually going to say sort of the same thing, or something very similar, which is that people don't take the backup process very seriously whenever it's, or not everyone, but a lot of people don't take it too seriously whenever they set everything up. They're kind of like, okay, I've set up my Trezor, I'm good to go. And the backup or recovery seed, Saadya was calling it recovery seed. We've also began calling it the backup. They're interchangeable, but backup is kind of
So
more the
when
word we're
you
starting to use now.
get the actual Trezor, it will generally say recovery seed on the card itself, and then below that it'll say wallet backup.
Yeah. So a lot of times people kind of toss the backup to the side and they're like, okay, I'm done. And it's like, no, that's actually the important thing that you need. A device itself can be lost or destroyed, and as long as no one has the PIN code, they can't get in. You can get a new device, and then you can use the recovery seed to get back into your wallet. But if the recovery seed or the backup is gone for any reason, if it gets destroyed, it gets lost, it gets stolen, it is gone. You cannot access the wallet unless you have the device, but you're kind of playing with fire there. If you've only got the device left, your backup is the thing that matters. So not taking that seriously, I found, is kind of the biggest thing, and
Yeah.
a very difficult point to drive home with people sometimes, because they're like, well, it's not that big of a deal. I'm like, no, it is a big
The
deal.
backup
You do need that thing.
the backup is more important than the Trezor device itself.
Yeah.
Trezors can be replaced. We have a 2-year warranty. If your Trezor breaks within that 2-year warranty, you can get a replacement. Email us. I've done this personally. I've helped people replace their Trezor.
Mhm.
Which is, in my view, it's like having a 2-year warranty. That's really good value for money,
Yeah.
frankly. But if your backup is gone, well, we can't replace that, basically.
Yeah, and that's also, this ties into what we were talking about earlier about exchanges. That's why that's such a big deal, is because the exchange is holding your backup or your recovery seed on their end. And some of them will like show it to you. They'll allow you to access it, but they are also holding it, which means you are not the only person with access to your money. Someone else has access to it as well. So it all kind of, it's tied in and interconnected
You have
from one place
access
to
to
the
your
next.
money as long as, well, because you don't have the private key yourself, you have access to your money as long as the exchange is um, going to agree to give you that access. The
Yeah.
second the exchange shuts off that access, you don't have access to your any of your money on the exchange.
And that ties right back into the premise of trust. Like you are trusting an exchange to handle your funds or your money. Whereas with a Trezor device, that's not necessary. You don't need to trust anyone because you can verify that you have the access to the funds of the technology.
Right.
But with that out of the way, what are some of the fears and concerns you would say most people have, or things they run into whenever it comes? Someone's doing this for the first time; they're already unfamiliar with something. They're obviously going to have some concerns or some fears in their head. What are some of those, and then how would you address them?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of hesitancy, and I've experienced this also personally. There's a lot of hesitancy in terms of even if you know that exchanges are extremely unreliable, switching up your setup. It does take time. It does take effort, energy, money. Um, and again, this is why I say go slow, work at it every day or every week, make some progress towards getting your Trezor, getting it set up,
Mhm.
etc. But I think this is also where Trezor Expert can really come in and just help you with in an hour getting most of the setup done, having you on your way towards thinking about, okay, this is how I'm going to secure my Bitcoin.
Trezor Expert, book a session now. But no, seriously, I do kind of wish I'd had Trezor Expert when I started. It would have been like very helpful. And I feel this is kind of what's been happening with the crypto industry in general, is we've been introducing more and more improvements over time. And it's becoming easier and easier to get into it yourself, to do these things yourself. Even when I started 6 years ago, it's like I had the device and I had instructions, and that did help and make it easier, but I didn't have anyone helping me or like holding my hand, helping guide me through things. 6 years prior to that, it was even harder. We didn't have a lot of the standards that we have today. So something like Trezor Expert really is an a venue or an avenue that you can take that hasn't really existed up until this point.
Yeah.
And there is like, it's not just like, hey, get our thing. It's like, it's actually pretty cool. I did some of the test runs before it even started. And these people know their stuff. I can say that. It's like, it's basically like having a personal trainer at a gym. Like you can just go to the gym and try and figure things out, but it is awesome when you have a personal trainer who's able to guide you through exactly what you need to do in the most efficient path possible. That's basically what Trezor Expert does, and it's way less. How much does it cost now? What do we decide?
$99 or
99.
euros. Yeah,
Uh-huh,
99.
okay, yeah, I think that's reasonable, but
Yeah.
I'll let you guys decide for yourselves.
I think so too. I think, you know, if you look at storing your money with a bank, you can store, again, to use an example from the States, you can store your money with Wells Fargo. But Wells Fargo, for a lot of customers, charges a fee that's a little under $10 per month. Okay.
Mhm.
So a Trezor Safe 3 costs $79. That's 8 months worth of Wells Fargo. It's less than 8 months worth of Wells Fargo fees. A Trezor Expert session costs $99, less than 10 months worth of Wells Fargo fees. So in less than 2 years, if you are keeping your money on a Trezor, well, rather than keeping your money with the folks over at Wells Fargo, you have saved money.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, you put it into those terms, I think it is that simple. It's not like a very complex idea.
Yeah.
Like it's just the flat numbers. That is how it plays out.
Yep. You've saved 6 months worth of fees. You've saved yourself $60.
Mhm. And one other thing, like if there were, I mean, I guess we can start wrapping things up. But if there's one thing that you think people should take away in terms of self custody, or if there's one thing they should remember, what would you say that should be?
Don't trust, verify. But if I had to trust something, it would be open source.
Yeah. Um, I think mine would be don't be lazy. I think a lot of people use the excuse that they're scared to get started with self custody or buying a hardware wallet, things like that. But I really think it has more to do with laziness. You can trust your brain to figure things out. Like your brain is a very powerful tool, and it's something you can learn if you put effort into it. I think a lot of times it's like, oh, I'll get around to it. Like that's not because you're dumb. That's probably has more to do with laziness and just not getting started. And I know that like I've been a victim of that myself before, like, or guilty of that, I guess I should say. Like there's been times where it's like, oh, like, you know, I'm concerned with getting to know these things, like figuring stuff out for myself. But really, it was like I just wasn't doing it. Like as soon as I started looking into things and learning for my own, I was like, oh, a lot of this makes sense. I just hadn't put the time or effort into it before now. That's probably the one takeaway I would say for people.
As have I, especially in this space. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot
Yeah.
to contribute to.
Oh, there's so much.
It's an evolving space, and we hope you'll join us in it.
Yeah. Where can people go to learn more about getting started or more about Trezor and self custody?
Trezor.io, our website.
Uh-huh.
And we also have Trezor.io/learn, which is this very comprehensive, what we call a knowledge base. So it gives you a lot of instructions about how to use Trezor with Bitcoin, with other cryptocurrencies.
Hmm.
And like I personally contribute to it. I've worked on some articles, for example, about very in-depth transaction mechanics. And we're just, we're always working at improving, making it better. Your feedback's very important to us. Reach out to us if you want to, and with some sort of tidbit, some sort of compliment, criticism, whatever you want, just tell us, and we're gonna make it better for you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. Go through us. Do everything with Trezor. I've been happy with that since I started. I've never had any issues with Trezor. The thing I've liked about them is they're very straightforward, very open, and a ton of integrity. That was something that I've honestly never seen from any company. Definitely not to the degree I've seen it here. I've always had the impression, I'm sure anyone who's worked a job can relate to this, but it looks much shinier on the outside than it does on the inside. And this is the first company where I didn't really feel that way. I was like, okay, what kind of like, I don't know, dirty underbelly is there going to be? And there wasn't one. Everyone is totally legitimate here. Like they're all very straightforward, honest, open, and like integrity is like number one
Yeah.
at Trezor. I
And
feel like.
I mean, when we're writing code for the Trezor, that's all out in the open.
Mhm.
The whole process is out in the open. Like we know that there are people watching us, and we take that very seriously.
Yep, open source.
Yeah.
That's it. Now you know what that is if you manage to listen to us for this entire podcast. That's about good. Thank you, Saadya, for coming on. We appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure, Sean.
All of your knowledge. Yeah, I stepped out of the mic there for a second. Maybe we can leave the handshake in. I don't care if it looks awkward.
I went back to the mic to say that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we'll see you guys later. That's episode 1 of Trezor Talks. Thank you again, Nick. We'll see you guys around.
See ya.